Snow fell over downtown Chicago like the city was trying to bury its secrets beneath white silence. No one noticed the woman sitting alone near the window of one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. But if they had looked closely, they would have seen the exact moment her world collapsed. Amelia Carter lowered her gaze to the message glowing on her phone. "We're pulling out. Best of luck." 3 years of sleepless nights. 3 years of building her startup from borrowed money, cheap coffee, and impossible hope. Tonight had been supposed to change everything. The investors sitting across from her had smiled during presentations, praised her ideas, and promised celebration after the final agreement. Instead, they abandoned her before dessert arrived. Around her, wealthy couples laughed over wine while executives toasted million-dollar deals. Amelia remained perfectly still, her breath trapped inside her chest. Heart pounding. Fear tasted bitter. She opened her banking app. The number staring back at her turned her blood cold. She couldn't afford the bill. For a second, panic threatened to take control. She imagined explaining her situation to the staff. The curious stares. The humiliation. The whispers. Failure. Embarrassment tightened around her throat. Amelia slowly folded her napkin and stood. No scene. No tears. No begging. She slipped toward the restaurant's side exit like someone trying to disappear before the world noticed she had lost everything. Across the restaurant, Adrian Kane noticed immediately. Most people saw a successful businessman dining alone beneath crystal chandeliers. They didn't see the king hidden beneath tailored black suits. The man whose empire controlled Chicago through legitimate businesses and dangerous loyalties. Adrian rarely paid attention to strangers. He observed weaknesses. He calculated threats. He maintained absolute control. Yet something about Amelia Carter disrupted his usual indifference. Perhaps it was the way she held her shoulders straight despite heartbreak. Or how she walked away with dignity when fear should have broken her. His dark eyes followed her departure. Who was she? Adrian asked quietly. One of his men leaned closer. Apparently her investors walked out. She couldn't pay the bill. The room waited for amusement. For mockery. Instead, Adrian reached for his wallet. Take care of it. The bodyguard blinked. The entire bill? Adrian adjusted his cufflinks. Now. Confusion flickered across the table. The king didn't involve himself in strangers' problems. Yet moments later, Amelia's unpaid bill disappeared without explanation. Adrian remained seated for exactly 30 seconds. Then he stood. Chicago's hidden ruler walked into the freezing night. Snowflakes settled against the shoulders of his expensive wool coat as city lights reflected across icy sidewalks. Cars moved through crowded streets while strangers hurried toward warm destinations. Adrian searched. He wasn't entirely certain why. He had faced danger without hesitation. Built an empire through discipline. Protected those under his loyalty. But the image of Amelia leaving alone refused to disappear. He finally spotted her several blocks away. Not beneath bright storefronts. Not surrounded by friends. At a nearly empty bus stop. Amelia sat alone beneath flickering streetlights, clutching papers with trembling fingers. Her carefully maintained composure shattered. Tears streamed silently down her face as she read the eviction notice resting in her lap. Past due. Vacate immediately. Her breath hitched. Heart pounding, she pressed trembling hands against her mouth to stop the sound escaping her. No audience remained. No investors. No expectations. Only exhaustion. Fear. And the devastating loneliness of realizing she had nowhere left to run. Snow gathered in her dark hair while strangers passed without looking twice. From across the street, Adrian Kane stood completely still. The king of Chicago had witnessed betrayal, greed, and ambition powerful enough to destroy families. Yet nothing unsettled him quite like the sight of a woman trying so desperately not to fall apart alone. His expression darkened. Protect. The unfamiliar instinct arrived without invitation. As Amelia lowered her tear-filled eyes back toward the eviction notice, unaware she was being watched, Adrian took a step closer through the falling snow. Because for the first time in years, the man who controlled an empire had found someone he couldn't ignore. And he had no idea that this broken entrepreneur was about to change the course of his entire life. Snow continued falling over Chicago long after most people had disappeared into warm homes and familiar routines. Beneath the flickering light of the nearly empty bus stop, Amelia Carter folded the eviction notice with trembling hands. She quickly wiped away the tears that had escaped despite her determination not to break in public. She had lost investors. She was losing her apartment. And the small company she had sacrificed everything to build was hanging by a thread. The sound of approaching footsteps made her freeze. Fear tightened in her chest. Amelia lifted her eyes and found herself staring at a man dressed in a dark wool coat dusted with snow. He looked expensive without trying, powerful without announcing it. His expression remained controlled, but his eyes carried an unusual stillness. "Are you all right?" he asked. The question almost made her laugh. No one asked that anymore. People asked for updates, for progress reports, for solutions. But never that. Amelia quickly straightened. "I'm fine." It was the kind of lie exhausted people perfected. Adrian Kane studied her quietly. Even standing beneath a broken bus shelter, she carried herself with dignity. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, her eyes red from unshed tears, but there was stubborn strength in the way she lifted her chin. "You don't look fine." "That's because I had a bad night." Silence settled between them before Amelia surprised herself by speaking again. "My company develops affordable scheduling software for small businesses. Tonight was supposed to save it." Her breath trembled slightly. "Instead, my investors left." Adrian remained beside her. "What happened?" "My father got sick 2 years ago." The whisper of her voice almost disappeared beneath the wind. "Medical bills destroyed everything. I emptied savings accounts, took loans, sold whatever I could. After he died." Her eyes lowered. "The company became the only thing I had left." Heart pounding, she forced herself to smile. Apparently that wasn't enough either. 4 reasons Adrian couldn't explain. Her honesty unsettled him. Chicago's hidden king had witnessed greed disguised as ambition. He had built an empire where power and control determined survival. Yet this woman continued fighting after losing nearly everything. "You shouldn't have to face this alone," he said. Amelia shook her head immediately. "No. You don't even know what I was offering." "I know enough." She met his gaze. "I don't want charity." The refusal came without hesitation. Fear lived inside her. But pride stood taller. "I'll figure it out," she continued. "I always do." Something unfamiliar tightened in Adrian's chest. Respect. Most people wanted something from powerful men. Money. Influence. Protection. Amelia Carter wanted none of it. Their bus arrived moments later. Before boarding, she glanced back toward him. "Thank you for asking if I was all right." Then she disappeared into the night. Adrian stood motionless beneath falling snow. Protect. The instinct returned stronger this time. The next morning, Amelia received an unexpected email. A temporary extension had been approved on her apartment lease. 2 overdue supplier payments had mysteriously been settled. An anonymous grant application she'd submitted months earlier had suddenly moved forward for reconsideration. She stared at the screen in disbelief. Coincidences? They had to be. Across the city, Adrian gave quiet instructions. "No direct contact," he ordered. "Handle everything anonymously." One of his men hesitated. "Why?" Adrian adjusted the cuff of his black shirt. "Because if she discovers the truth, she'll refuse the help." Days passed. Then weeks. Yet somehow their paths continued crossing. At coffee shops. Bookstores. Outside office buildings. Each meeting unexpected. Each conversation lasting slightly longer than the last. Amelia spoke about rebuilding. Adrian listened. She challenged his cynical outlook. He admired her resilience. The bond forming between them arrived quietly. Safe, steady, dangerously real. Adrian found himself anticipating their conversations. He learned she remembered employees' birthdays despite financial struggles. That she carried snacks in her bag for stray dogs near her office. That fear never stopped her from trying again. For the first time in years, the king looked forward to seeing someone. One rainy evening, Amelia locked the doors of her tiny office and stepped onto the sidewalk. The familiar sound of Adrian's voice stopped her. "You work too hard." A small smile touched her lips. "And you appear everywhere." Before either could say more, movement across the street caught Adrian's attention. 3 men approached with cold expressions and purposeful steps. Amelia's smile disappeared instantly. Heart pounding, her face drained of color. Fear returned to her eyes. "They found me," she whispered. Adrian turned toward her slowly. "Who?" Amelia's breath caught. "The loan sharks." And this time they weren't asking politely for their money back. Fear had a way of arriving quietly before it announced itself. For Amelia Carter, it started with unanswered calls. Suppliers suddenly canceled scheduled deliveries. 2 longtime clients unexpectedly withdrew from contracts they had promised to renew. Then came the anonymous messages arriving in her inbox late at night. "Pay what you owe. Time is running out. You can't hide forever. Heart pounding, Amelia deleted them one by one. She convinced herself they were scare tactics. She had fought through worse. Losing investors hadn't destroyed her. Medical debt hadn't broken her. She would rebuild again. She always did. But by the following week, fear became impossible to ignore. When Amelia unlocked the doors of her small office one snowy morning, her breath caught in her throat. Computer screens were shattered. Important files had been scattered across the floor. Equipment she couldn't afford to replace sat damaged beyond repair. The tiny company she had poured years of sacrifice into looked violated. Not destroyed. Her employees stood frozen in disbelief. One of them finally spoke. "I'm sorry, Amelia. I can't do this anymore." Another quietly submitted their resignation before lunch. By evening, half her team had walked away. Fear spread faster than loyalty ever could. Alone in the empty office, Amelia stared at the broken remains of her dream. Danger surrounded her from every direction. The company was collapsing. The loans remained unpaid. And now someone wanted her to understand exactly how powerless she truly was. Across Chicago, Adrian Kane listened without interruption as reports unfolded before him. His expression remained unreadable. "They targeted her office," one of his men explained. "The same people from last week." Silence filled the room. The king of Chicago rarely involved himself in personal matters. His empire functioned through discipline, power, and absolute control. Threats were managed. Business continued. Emotions remained irrelevant. Until Amelia. Something unfamiliar darkened Adrian's expression. Protect. The instinct had stopped asking permission. "Resolve it," Adrian said quietly. "No public attention." "Understood. No fear tactics." The room hesitated. Adrian lifted his gaze. "And make sure she never knows." Hours later, Amelia received unexpected calls. The landlord who had threatened eviction suddenly extended payment deadlines. A supplier offered replacement equipment at almost no cost. One former employee changed their mind and returned. Coincidences stacked on top of miracles. Yet Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that unseen hands kept intervening. The sensation confused her. Because danger still existed. But somehow, whenever things became unbearable, something shifted in her favor. Someone was watching. Days later, Amelia left her office carrying coffee and paperwork through downtown Chicago. She noticed the same black sedan parked nearby. Again. And again. At first she dismissed it. Until an elderly woman stumbled near a busy crosswalk. Before Amelia could react, one of the men she'd seen inside that sedan rushed forward to help before disappearing without explanation. Another coincidence. Another impossible timing. Questions formed. Who were they? Why did fear retreat whenever they appeared? And why did Adrian Kane always seem to know when she needed reassurance? That evening, unable to ignore her growing suspicions, Amelia followed Adrian after one of their unexpected coffee meetings. She told herself she only wanted answers. Nothing more. Snow drifted softly around her as she trailed him through Chicago's quieter streets until he entered a private building hidden behind an upscale restaurant. The entrance remained heavily guarded. Heart pounding, Amelia slipped through a partially open side corridor. Then she stopped. Breath trapped inside her lungs. Inside the dimly lit room stood Adrian Kane. No warm smiles. No quiet conversations over coffee. No mysterious stranger asking if she was all right. Men in expensive suits surrounded him. They listened without interruption. Respected him without question. Feared him without hesitation. Power radiated through the room. Control. Authority. Loyalty. One whispered title shattered everything Amelia thought she knew. The king has spoken. Amelia's blood ran cold. Because the man she had slowly begun trusting wasn't simply a businessman who appeared whenever she needed saving. He was Chicago's hidden Mafia King. And suddenly, Amelia had no idea whether she should run from Adrian Kane or fear the enemies powerful enough to make a king choose to protect her. Fear had a strange way of changing people. Hours earlier, Amelia Carter had been wondering why Adrian Kane always appeared exactly when life threatened to crush her. Now, standing hidden behind the doorway of that private meeting room, she finally understood. The man who had paid her restaurant bill. The man who waited beside her at a freezing bus stop. The man who quietly asked if she was all right. He wasn't simply kind. He was the king. Chicago's hidden ruler. The head of an empire powerful enough to command absolute loyalty from everyone inside that room. Amelia stepped backward, her breath uneven. She didn't wait for explanations. She ran. For 2 days, Adrian's messages remained unanswered. Coffee shops they once visited felt unfamiliar. Sidewalks they had walked together became routes she deliberately avoided. Every act of kindness he had shown replayed endlessly inside her mind. Had any of it been real? Or had she merely become another obligation controlled by a dangerous man? Fear tangled itself with disappointment. Betrayal hurt because trust had existed first. Amelia had trusted him. The next snowfall arrived quietly over Chicago. As Amelia locked the doors of her office, she found Adrian waiting beneath a street lamp across the road. His black overcoat blended into the evening shadows. He didn't move closer. He simply waited. "I don't think we should talk," Amelia said. Adrian nodded. "Then don't." Confusion flickered across her face. "You don't owe me explanations," he continued. "But there are things I need you to see." Amelia should have walked away. Instead, curiosity anchored her feet to the frozen sidewalk. Over the following days, Adrian never defended himself with grand speeches. He never justified the empire he controlled. Instead, he let actions speak. He took Amelia to a community center funded anonymously through one of his companies. She watched elderly residents receive medical assistance they otherwise couldn't afford. She discovered scholarship programs helping students burdened by debt. She saw food deliveries arrive at shelters no one else remembered. Employees spoke about Adrian with gratitude rather than fear. "He paid for my daughter's surgery," one janitor whispered. "He helped after my husband died," another woman quietly admitted. Amelia struggled to reconcile the contradictions. Kings weren't supposed to be compassionate. Dangerous men weren't supposed to care. Yet Adrian never sought recognition. He simply ensured people survived. "Why?" Amelia finally asked. Snow drifted around them as they stood outside the shelter. Adrian remained silent long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. "Because I know what it means to be powerless." The whisper of his voice surprised her. "My father ruled through fear. He believed power existed only to take." He glanced toward the city skyline. "I chose differently." Close enough to hear the honesty beneath his restraint, Amelia realized something unsettling. Adrian carried guilt, responsibility, loneliness. "You protect everyone," she murmured. "No." His gaze settled entirely on her. "Not everyone." Heart-pounding, Amelia looked away first. The attraction she had tried to bury only deepened. Because Adrian never asked her to admire his world. He simply allowed her to witness the man beneath the title. Safe. The feeling frightened her most. Because she had no right to feel safe beside someone capable of commanding an empire. Yet somehow she did. Days later, Amelia returned to her office to find unusual tension lingering in the air. Employees whispered nervously. The receptionist avoided eye contact. Fear crawled up Amelia's spine. Then she noticed Adrian's men arriving outside the building. Expressions hardened. Phones rang continuously. Something had changed. When Adrian entered her office, his usual control remained intact. Only his eyes betrayed him. "What happened?" Amelia asked softly. Silence answered first. Then Adrian placed a sealed envelope onto her desk. Amelia's fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside rested a photograph of herself. Alongside it sat a single typed sentence. "Bounty approved." Her breath caught. Heart pounding violently, Amelia slowly lifted her gaze toward Adrian. For the first time since meeting him, Chicago's king looked genuinely afraid. Because someone had placed a price on Amelia Carter. And in the shadows of the empire, people had already begun hunting her. Fear spread through Adrian Kane's empire faster than any enemy ever could. The sealed envelope containing Amelia's photograph remained untouched on Adrian's desk long after everyone else had left the room. The bounty notice wasn't random. Someone powerful had approved it. Someone with access to information buried deep within the empire. For the first time in years, Chicago's king questioned the loyalty surrounding him. "Who knew about her?" Adrian asked quietly. The room remained silent. His most trusted lieutenant, Dominic Russo, stood nearby with practiced composure. Dominic had served Adrian for over a decade. He had witnessed the rise of the empire, managed negotiations, and protected its interests with unwavering efficiency. Or so Adrian had believed. "We'll find who's responsible," Dominic assured him. But something had changed. Control no longer felt absolute. Over the following days, whispers replaced certainty. Meetings ended abruptly when Adrian entered. Longtime allies avoided eye contact. Information arrived incomplete. Fear had infected the very foundation of the empire. Betrayal rarely announced itself loudly. It revealed itself through absence, missing reports, delayed responses, questions nobody wanted to answer. Meanwhile, Amelia struggled beneath the crushing weight of a reality she never chose. A bounty. Someone had transformed her existence into an opportunity for strangers seeking profit. Danger followed every unfamiliar face. Coffee shops felt threatening. Sidewalks became unpredictable. Even sleep offered little peace. "You should disappear," Amelia whispered one evening. Adrian stood near the penthouse windows overlooking Chicago's glowing skyline. "No. You don't understand." His gaze settled on her. "They're using me against you." Heart pounding, Amelia fought tears threatening to escape. "I won't become leverage." Adrian crossed the room. Close enough for her to recognize exhaustion hidden beneath his controlled exterior. "You aren't leverage." The whisper of his voice steadied her trembling breath. "You matter." Fear tightened around her chest anyway. Because loving a king meant inheriting his enemies. 2 nights later, the empire fractured. Adrian's intelligence team uncovered hidden financial transfers linked to rival organizations. Private schedules had been compromised. Protective measures surrounding Amelia had quietly weakened. The truth arrived like winter itself. Cold. Unforgiving. Dominic Russo had been feeding information to enemies for months. The lieutenant Adrian trusted most had become the architect of betrayal. Years of loyalty collapsed instantly. "He wanted your throne," one advisor explained. "No," Adrian replied quietly. His expression hardened. "He wanted the empire." War no longer waited outside Chicago's borders. It had entered Adrian's home. Amelia saw the devastation hidden behind his composure. 4 years, Adrian had survived by maintaining control. Predictability had protected him. Trust had been earned carefully. Dominic shattered all of it. "You blame yourself," Amelia observed softly. "I should have seen it." "No." Her eyes met his steadily. "Betrayal belongs to the betrayer." Something vulnerable flickered across Adrian's face before disappearing beneath discipline. Then Amelia vanished. It happened without chaos. Without warning. One moment she stood inside her small office gathering paperwork. The next, silence greeted abandoned coffee cups and unfinished notes. No struggle. Only absence. Heart pounding violently, Adrian stared at the empty office hours later. Fear consumed the room. For the first time since inheriting the empire, Chicago's king looked powerless. Protect. The instinct became obsession. "Find her," Adrian ordered. Every business meeting stopped. Every alliance shifted priorities. Resources moved across the city. War preparations began. The empire transformed into a machine built for one purpose: bringing Amelia home. Because this was no longer about power, or reputation, or control. It was about the woman who had reminded Adrian Kane that kindness still existed. Hours later, Amelia opened her eyes inside an unfamiliar room illuminated by soft golden light. No chains. No visible threats. Only silence. Confusion settled heavily inside her chest as she noticed documents spread across an antique desk nearby. Old photographs. Medical records. Newspaper clippings. Curiosity overcame fear. She stepped closer. Breath catching painfully. One photograph slipped from trembling fingers. The image showed her late father standing beside Dominic Russo, smiling. Dated 22 years earlier. Heart pounding, Amelia uncovered additional documents connecting her father's mysterious past to Adrian's traitorous lieutenant. Tears blurred her vision. Because the betrayal threatening the empire had never been only about Adrian Kane. It had started long before she met Chicago's king. And somehow, her father had been part of the secret all along. Fear spread through Adrian Kane's empire faster than any enemy ever could. The sealed envelope containing Amelia's photograph remained untouched on Adrian's desk long after everyone else had left the room. The bounty notice wasn't random. Someone powerful had approved it. Someone with access to information buried deep within the empire. For the first time in years, Chicago's king questioned the loyalty surrounding him. "Who knew about her?" Adrian asked quietly. The room remained silent. His most trusted lieutenant, Dominic Russo, stood nearby with practiced composure. Dominic had served Adrian for over a decade. He had witnessed the rise of the empire, managed negotiations, and protected its interests with unwavering efficiency. Or so Adrian had believed. "We'll find who's responsible," Dominic assured him. But something had changed. Control no longer felt absolute. Over the following days, whispers replaced certainty. Meetings ended abruptly when Adrian entered. Longtime allies avoided eye contact. Information arrived incomplete. Fear had infected the very foundation of the empire. Betrayal rarely announced itself loudly. It revealed itself through absence. Missing reports. Delayed responses. Questions nobody wanted to answer. Meanwhile, Amelia struggled beneath the crushing weight of a reality she never chose. A bounty. Someone had transformed her existence into an opportunity for strangers seeking profit. Danger followed every unfamiliar face. Coffee shops felt threatening. Sidewalks became unpredictable. Even sleep offered little peace. "You should disappear," Amelia whispered one evening. Adrian stood near the penthouse windows overlooking Chicago's glowing skyline. "No. You don't understand." His gaze settled on her. "They're using me against you." Heart pounding, Amelia fought tears threatening to escape. "I won't become leverage." Adrian crossed the room. Close enough for her to recognize exhaustion hidden beneath his controlled exterior. "You aren't leverage." The whisper of his voice steadied her trembling breath. "You matter." Fear tightened around her chest anyway. Because loving a king meant inheriting his enemies. 2 nights later, the empire fractured. Adrian's intelligence team uncovered hidden financial transfers linked to rival organizations. Private schedules had been compromised. Protective measures surrounding Amelia had quietly weakened. The truth arrived like winter itself. Cold. Unforgiving. Dominic Russo had been feeding information to enemies for months. The lieutenant Adrian trusted most had become the architect of betrayal. Years of loyalty collapsed instantly. "He wanted your throne," one advisor explained. "No," Adrian replied quietly. His expression hardened. "He wanted the empire." War no longer waited outside Chicago's borders. It had entered Adrian's home. Amelia saw the devastation hidden behind his composure. 4 years, Adrian had survived by maintaining control. Predictability had protected him. Trust had been earned carefully. Dominic shattered all of it. "You blame yourself," Amelia observed softly. "I should have seen it." "No." Her eyes met his steadily. "Betrayal belongs to the betrayer." Something vulnerable flickered across Adrian's face before disappearing beneath discipline. Then Amelia vanished. It happened without chaos. Without warning. One moment she stood inside her small office gathering paperwork. The next, silence greeted abandoned coffee cups and unfinished notes. No struggle. Only absence. Heart pounding violently, Adrian stared at the empty office hours later. Fear consumed the room. For the first time since inheriting the empire, Chicago's king looked powerless. Protect. The instinct became obsession. "Find her," Adrian ordered. Every business meeting stopped. Every alliance shifted priorities. Resources moved across the city. War preparations began. The empire transformed into a machine built for one purpose: bringing Amelia home. Because this was no longer about power, or reputation, or control. It was about the woman who had reminded Adrian Kane that kindness still existed. Hours later, Amelia opened her eyes inside an unfamiliar room illuminated by soft golden light. No chains. No visible threats. Only silence. Confusion settled heavily inside her chest as she noticed documents spread across an antique desk nearby. Old photographs. Medical records. Newspaper clippings. Curiosity overcame fear. She stepped closer. Breath catching painfully. One photograph slipped from trembling fingers. The image showed her late father standing beside Dominic Russo. Smiling. Dated 22 years earlier. Heart pounding, Amelia uncovered additional documents connecting her father's mysterious past to Adrian's traitorous lieutenant. Tears blurred her vision. Because the betrayal threatening the empire had never been only about Adrian Kane. It had started long before she met Chicago's king. And somehow, her father had been part of the secret all along. War arrived in Chicago disguised as business. Boardrooms turned hostile overnight. Investors withdrew support from Kane-owned companies. Financial institutions froze accounts connected to legitimate enterprises. Media outlets circulated carefully crafted narratives designed to weaken public trust. The enemy didn't need bullets to bring an empire to its knees. They only needed chaos. Inside the Kane Operations Center, tension pressed against every wall. Advisors moved between illuminated screens tracking collapsing alliances and shifting markets. The empire Adrian had spent years building faced threats from rival factions eager to inherit its influence. But Chicago's king remained standing. Heart pounding beneath controlled composure, Adrian studied the latest intelligence. "They're attacking every front," one advisor whispered. Then we stopped fighting separately, Adrian replied. Because this war had evolved beyond territory. It had become personal. Across the city, Amelia sat before encrypted files she'd painstakingly assembled from hidden evidence in her father's archives. The frightened entrepreneur who once struggled to pay restaurant bills no longer existed. She connected shell corporations to criminal finances, exposed false charities used for laundering, mapped relationships between powerful executives and rival organizations. Fear still existed, but it no longer controlled her. She became powerful. The daughter of a man who had died protecting the truth refused to let his sacrifice disappear beneath corruption. You should rest, Adrian told her during one late-night strategy meeting. Amelia glanced toward him. And let you carry this alone? Close enough to recognize the affection hidden beneath his concern, she offered a tired smile. You protected me when I couldn't understand why. Let me protect what's left of your empire. Something shifted in the room. Advisors who had once questioned Amelia's presence now listened attentively. Respect replaced uncertainty. Loyalty deepened. Together, Adrian and Amelia became impossible to separate. The king and the woman standing beside him. Not behind him. Beside him. Days later, Amelia presented evidence exposing financial networks supporting their enemies. The room fell silent. One veteran advisor lowered his gaze respectfully. She's saving us. Another nodded. Our queen. Amelia's breath caught. She had never sought titles. Only truth. Only survival. Yet somehow she'd become essential to the empire's future. The final offensive unfolded through strategy rather than spectacle. Corrupt executives found their secrets exposed. Political allies abandoned rival factions. Businesses built through deception collapsed under investigations triggered by Amelia's evidence. One by one, the enemy organization weakened. Power shifted. The empire endured. Because war wasn't always won through force. Sometimes intelligence changed everything. Standing inside the operations center overlooking Chicago's skyline, Adrian finally allowed himself to believe victory remained possible. He turned toward Amelia. You changed this city. No. Her voice softened. We changed it. The whisper settled deeply between them. Fear no longer stood between them. Trust did. Loyalty did. Love, though neither dared speak its name aloud. Hours later, final confirmations arrived. The mastermind's financial empire had fallen. Rival factions fractured. The war was ending. Relief swept through the room. For the first time in weeks, employees smiled. Advisors embraced. Chicago's empire had survived. Then alarms echoed through the operations center. Confusion replaced celebration. One overlooked contingency. One final act of desperation. Heart pounding violently, Amelia looked toward the security screens displaying urgent warnings. Danger. Adrian moved immediately. Protect. The instinct had defined every choice he'd made since meeting her. As Amelia processed what was happening, Adrian crossed the distance between them without hesitation. Close enough to shield. Close enough to save. The room erupted into chaos around them. Fear returned sharper than ever. Amelia reached for him. Adrian? His eyes found hers. Steady. Certain. The king who ruled an empire through discipline and sacrifice made his choice without regret. Because loving Amelia Carter had taught him something power never could. Some people were worth everything. Even yourself. Seconds later, silence followed. Amelia's breath shattered. Because Adrian Kane collapsed into her arms. The man who had protected an empire had just sacrificed himself protecting her. And as Chicago's queen-to-be held the critically injured king against her trembling chest, one terrifying question remained. Could the empire survive if it lost the man who built it? The first sound Amelia Carter noticed was the steady rhythm of Adrian Kane's breathing. For days, fear had become her shadow. The thought of losing the man who had quietly protected her, challenged her, and changed her understanding of love had hollowed something inside her. Now, standing beside his hospital bed within the private medical wing of the Kane estate, she finally allowed herself to exhale. Adrian survived. Heart pounding, Amelia closed her eyes as relief washed over her. The king opened his eyes slowly. The first thing he saw was Amelia. You stayed, he whispered, his voice rough from exhaustion. Tears filled Amelia's eyes despite the smile trembling across her lips. You really thought I wouldn't? For a man who controlled an empire through discipline and certainty, Adrian suddenly looked uncertain. I've spent my entire life believing people eventually leave. Amelia moved close enough to take his hand. Then maybe it's time you believe something different. Outside the estate walls, the enemy finally collapsed. The corruption hidden beneath decades of lies surfaced through investigations triggered by Amelia's evidence. Political figures lost influence. Criminal alliances fractured. Businesses built upon deception disappeared beneath public scrutiny. Chicago began healing. The war ended. Peace returned. Months later, Amelia stood inside the newly expanded headquarters of her company. The same woman who once couldn't afford dinner now addressed investors eager to support her vision. Employees applauded. Clients trusted her. Success returned stronger than before. She became powerful. Not because fear disappeared, but because she refused to surrender to it. Meanwhile, the Kane Empire transformed. Loyalty no longer grew through obligation alone. Compassion entered places once ruled only by power and control. Adrian changed. He attended community initiatives anonymously, expanded scholarship programs, protected people who reminded him of who he might have become without kindness. For the first time in years, Chicago's king allowed himself happiness. One evening, beneath thousands of lights illuminating the Kane estate gardens, employees, advisors, and allies gathered to celebrate. Laughter replaced whispers of war. Families filled spaces once reserved for strategy meetings. Amelia stood near the balcony overlooking Chicago's skyline, wearing an elegant emerald gown that reflected quiet confidence rather than borrowed strength. "You've been avoiding everyone," Adrian observed. She turned toward him. "You've been watching me." A familiar softness entered his expression. "I always do." Close enough to hear each other's breath, silence settled comfortably between them. "I used to think survival was enough," Amelia admitted quietly. "And now?" Her eyes met his. "Now I want a life." Adrian reached for her hand. "I never expected you." The whisper carried more honesty than grand declarations ever could. "You challenged everything I believed." His thumb brushed against her fingers. "You taught me that protect doesn't mean carrying burdens alone. You reminded me that loyalty can exist without fear." Emotion tightened Amelia's throat. "You taught me that safe isn't a place," she replied softly. "It's a person." The world around them disappeared. "You are mine," Adrian said. "Not because I possess you, but because every day you choose to stay." Amelia smiled through gathering tears. "I choose you. I choose this empire. I choose us." Applause echoed through the estate gardens as Adrian guided her toward the celebration. The organization welcomed her without hesitation. Respect crowned her long before titles ever could. The struggling entrepreneur who once slipped through a restaurant's side exit to avoid embarrassment had become something extraordinary. The queen beside the king. She was not a victim. She became powerful. And together they built an empire rooted in loyalty, love, and hope. But as music drifted through the night and peace finally embraced Chicago, a confidential file arrived unexpectedly. Adrian opened it slowly. Amelia's breath caught. Inside rested surveillance photographs, restaurant receipts, bus stop images, evidence documenting moments from the very beginning. Someone had been watching them long before loan sharks, betrayals, and war. At the bottom of the file, one sentence waited beneath an unfamiliar signature. The Kane story was never the real beginning. And somewhere in the shadows, an unknown enemy had just decided to introduce themselves. A new chapter was about to begin.